Hey, good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending if you're joining us from Central Time or Eastern Time. Welcome to another event of the Inclusion Conversation with the Inclusion Initiative. I'm Grace Young Foster. I'm the founder and CEO of the Inclusion Initiative, and I am really pumped up for our talk today with Cameron Lee Small, our special, wonderful, fun guest who's been a really good friend of the Inclusion Initiative this past year. So before we get started, just want to remind folks that this is a LinkedIn Live, and we're also live streaming on our YouTube channel. So if you have questions, comments, you want to support Cam during this conversation, we encourage you to do so in real time. So we'll be able to see the questions that you post in the comments feature on the LinkedIn Live platform. So please engage with us and share your thoughts and comments throughout the conversation. And we will have a Q&A portion at the end of this conversation. So thanks again for joining us. We're really excited to have you all. And without further ado, want to introduce you to our guest speaker, Cameron Lee Small. He's the founder of Therapy Redeemed and a licensed counselor based in Minneapolis, Minnesota area. He's also just a really strong voice advocate for people with lived experience as adoptees and as foster alums, and has been for many, many years. And I'm really excited about Cam's new book that he'll talk about, The Adoptee's Journey. And we're going to dive into understanding some of his lived experience, what led him to write the book, and just some thoughts and encouragement that he has to share for our community. So, Cam, welcome.
Thanks for having me here, Grace.
Thanks for being here. How are you? You've got a lot going on with the book coming out. Obviously, you have your counseling practice. You're heading onto some big stages in the near future. So we're really excited for you and excited for all the momentum. How are you feeling about everything?
It's been encouraging and scary and a lot. And what a joy it is to be doing this work in community with other adoptees, with other adult adoptees, really going after this sort of like better world, mobilizing our voices, envisioning the future, championing resources lifelong because we grow up and we need resources after we leave the house, so to speak. So it's been really cool to be a part of that, and also mindful that I'm not a machine or a robot, so I need to really make sure that I'm tapping into my capacity for rest and boundaries. I heard this term from Dr. Susan Bronco last week: professional sustainability, and finding
Yeah.
really finding ways to make sure that that's something that can be real in my life. But yeah, awesome to be here. Celebrate that with you.
Yeah, professional sustainability, that really resonates. And it really resonates in general, like the boundary setting that you're talking about with our community of lived experience folks. So excited to dive into that with you a little bit in this conversation. But wanted to start today's conversation with just learning a little bit more about your own journey, your experience. And, as a reminder for folks that are tuning in, right, this is a space where, we both have lived experience as adoptees. And it's really important to honor that perspective. And it's really important to honor the story that we're telling that is our truth, right? And so a lot of times the dominant narratives in our society about adoption, about foster care, and about the child welfare system, and in this case, right, about religion and how that all plays into these systems, the dominant narratives are often the ones that are elevated and really centered. But in this conversation, we're centering our lived experience. We're centering our truth, our perspective. So why don't you tell us what you want us to know about your journey?
sometimes you can feel like, for those who are listening here, that you don't have anything worthwhile to share, perhaps, or that, oh, I've just had kind of a normal adoptive experience. I'm fine. And I think with the book, it's it's honoring that because you're allowed to feel that way. It's also giving some tools and resources and other testimonies to invite us as a community to ask, is there more to this story? And do I have a deeper capacity than I think to change that narrative? Not just for me, but for the collective. Because, you know, what is larger than ourselves, we're looking at um, on a global scale what needs to change and what conversations are stepping stones to that. So that's many entry points into that conversation that I share about in the book, and we'll probably get into that a little bit more here today.
Wonderful. So what was your, experience as an adoptee like that really led you, right, to this place in your life where you're leading you're a leading national voice for adoptees and thinking about mental health and creating that safe environment, right, for families to talk about this with their adopted children and adopted adult children, and to writing this book. So, what was that journey like for you?
When I was in high school, I actually wanted to play music as a profession. So I had my guitar, I had friends that I was playing music with, and we were playing shows. That was really my passion, music and just songwriting as an art form. And I think one of the reasons that resonated with me as an adolescent growing up in the 80s is that I was listening to songwriters and groups that were somehow giving voice to emotions that I had inside of me, but I couldn't name. For one of my favorite bands back then was Rage Against the Machine, and when I listened to some of the ways that they sang about injustice and what we need to do in response to that, and I know there's a level of entertainment in there, but just some of those messages about like where I'm allowed to have these feelings of anger, of sadness, of confusion, lament, even. And I think that was something that I didn't know could be expressed in other avenues as well, like writing, poetry, literature, things like that. So it wasn't until I was in my mid 20s that I was kind of invited to think about what does adoption have to do with me? Hey, I'm just some kid who grew up in Wisconsin. I feel white on the inside. Nothing to see here.
Yeah.
But some folks and some situations happened that really caused me to ask, is there more to this story? And am I missing out um, on parts of myself? Am I missing out in relationships with other folks? How am I connected to these other communities? And that sort of began this process that ultimately led me to write a book like this to say, hey, look, I know my story is my story and yours is going to be different. At the same time, um, throughout my personal journey and my journey as a licensed counselor, a clinician, practicing in the community on a daily basis, I see some patterns emerging. And I wonder if
Mm.
that relates to you. I wonder if you have noticed this in your life. And if so, here's some things to consider in terms of like actions to take. What do you think about it? And that's really what where the book comes in. It's just a slice of that dialogue, certainly on the shoulders of giants and informed by decades of other adoptee scholars and activists and mentors doing their thing. And I've been inspired by that, but I put sort of my voice into it as we ask what's the intersection of mental health, um, adoption, and the church and faith. And what does that mean for all of us?
Yeah, that really resonates. And I didn't know you grew up in Wisconsin. I did too.
Yeah, yeah,
That's really
cool.
interesting.
Yeah,
But yeah, and we know that there is a really big faith community in the Midwest. And so I think how you drew those parallels, right? It just speaks to what the narratives are. around us in our communities. So, wanted to step back a little bit before we talk, right, about really essentially your research that you've been doing for a long time by having these conversations with adoptees and their families and people in the church. Want to step back a little bit and just talk about your career pathway. You're creating change, you're inspiring people nationally, globally, and you're helping to drive us towards a better future for the generation coming behind us. And we're seeing this, right, with more and more people with lived experience stepping into the front lines, right, and joining you in advocating for adoptee centered conversations, adoptee centered work, right? And understanding how these systems are really shaping not only adoptees and foster them, but people with lived experience across all sorts of societal issues. Uh, I like to say, right, we are more alike than we think, but we don't always realize that, especially growing up, because we're not talking about it. We're not allowed these spaces to have these conversations with people with lived experience. So, you've built a pretty incredible career building your own practice, really being an advocate for lived experience voices. So, tell us a little bit about your career journey. So, graduated high school, what did you think you were going to do? And then you ended up going into being in therapy.
Yeah. Um, so maybe I haven't shared this too much. I actually enlisted in the Army when I was 18. So I went to basic training right after high school. And that was kind of part of my story and kind of, deep respect, profound respect for folks who have pressed into that for what it means to them. For me, it wasn't something that really just pulled me in and said, this is sort of like your path moving forward. Um, and then it was kind of these kind of one-off gap years, so to speak, of like figuring out what is it that I want to do with my life. And I talk about this a little bit in the book, but there's this idea of a second adolescence, so to speak. And I don't want to project onto all adoptees, but for me, because I hadn't spent much time as a youth really seeking to understand what does it mean that I was born in Korea and
Mm.
now I live here? What does that even mean? And what does it mean to be Asian American, to be Korean American, adopted? That there's a family that I'm still connected to that's living in Korea right now. And then just negotiating how do I relate with the community here in the US, trying to unpack internalized racism and shame and guilt, self hatred. And once I started exploring that conversation, I call it, or it's been called second adolescence, and it made me think about. I basically had to like relive, or I had to experience this additional stage of maturity and development and growing up that sometimes our non-adopted peers don't have to do. And there are nuances to that, of course, but for me, I kind of had to go through this journey of several years of just figuring out who am I,
Yeah.
because now that I'm not in high school anymore, nobody knows me. I am basically, I walk out into the street, people perceive me. I'm identified as either an outsider or a foreigner, this kind of other, Asian person. And I wasn't it didn't register on my radar about how to make sense of all of that. Um, so long story short, I was eventually invited into an Asian American community, and that opened the door to working with adoptees in culture camp scenarios and communities and situations. And that for me was the first time that I would meet adoptee community on a larger scale rather than, oh, a friend's sibling was adopted or my brother. Um, but I'm at this camp and there's like 70, 80, 90 Korean adoptees, and they're all ages. The ones that I was volunteering with are um, seventh and eighth grade to senior in high school, junior in high school, and I'm hearing the questions that they've asked, and I'm like, I've asked those same questions. I can't believe that there's a population of other adoptees out here. And so through that, I started to hear stories about birth search and reunion, and in other places in my life as well. Another mentor figure sharing that with me, and it really sort of launched me into this question of, should I search? Would I? Do I want to? I didn't know that was possible. And now that I'm talking about it, I'm like, I've got a lot of emotions around this. So that led me eventually to Korea, into a kind of unique reunion experience, non reunion. And then when I got back, I am asking my advisor on campus about what is possible for me here. I know that there's this deep need and that this community that doesn't have the luxury of having resources all year round. It's like they are waiting for camp. As soon as they leave, they're counting down the days till next summer to come to this space. I'm like, that blows my mind. And why do they have to wait a whole year? And yes, there were adult adoptees at the time who were coordinating and doing research and organizing community experiences, but they were just a handful. And I'm talking with adoptees throughout the U.S. and these different places, and they're like, just we don't have anything. I feel like an outsider wherever I go. And camp is the
Mhm.
one spot where I'm like my home away from home. And so I'm talking to my advisor, and he says, "Well, maybe you can get into the field of mental health, and um, either supporting these communities in a mental health setting, or creating more spaces for the adoptees in the situations that you're talking about. Create more situations for them to connect year round, and maybe even engage in some research and writing. A lot of clinicians I know do writing." So I'm like, "Oh, wow, that," and something like ignited within me. So
Yeah.
I started applying to grad school programs, and I think for me that was the thing. Like it's like I knew that's my work. As soon as I'm in his office, and I just remember like when he was talking about that, that was like the open door, the thread, and I just followed it. Um, so that is, yeah, my master's in counseling psychology, and then experiencing postmaster's work, getting all of the hours and licensure and credentialing happening, and then finally being able to hang up my virtual shingle, so to speak, and say, I have a private practice. It's a clinic dedicated for the health and well-being of those who've experienced family separation and adoption. Let's do this. I'm not the first one, but here I am in my little corner in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Mhm.
How can I help? So that was the beginning of Therapy Redeemed back in like 2018, 2019. And then the writing piece came when I started to have more of a virtual presence of just like blogs and newsletters and different posts here and there. And I was wondering, how do I coordinate some of this into a book? Because the clients that I was serving and the workshops I was facilitating, families I was working with, they were also hungry for information and education and tools. And I would, give them what they needed in that moment. But I was wondering, like, what could I do to just put it all into a packaged kind of form to say, hey, this isn't everything, but take a read through this and we can work through some of this together. These are like the main patterns, the main bullets that flow out of my clinical practice and my lived experience. We can work through that together. And a lot of publishers, I wrote this in the book, but they weren't looking for a book like this, where it's like I'm speaking about the conversations that we're not really having, but we should be having about loss and trauma, that
Yeah.
adoption isn't a one-time joyous event. There's a lifelong impact. I'm talking about these things and how the church has influenced that um, in harmful ways, and what we can do to reconcile and work toward restoration and health and well-being. Um, but it wasn't something that really anyone was looking for, until some folks that had connected with me um, through my account. They worked with InterVarsity Press and say, "Hey, we have an opportunity. We'd love to invite you to consider like writing a book." I said, "Let's go. Let's do
Yeah.
this." Um, So yeah, I mean, that was my first time in a actual like formal publishing setting. So I've been learning a lot. But that was about 2.5 years. I wrote some of it while we were abroad in China, visiting my spouse's family, some of it in Korea, some of it here in the cities. And it just launched last month, June 4th. And here we are talking about it.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's really exciting. And I just want to refer back to what you talked about at the beginning when someone that cared about you and someone that you trusted, right, said, "Hey, this sounds like this pathway is something that you might want to look into," and was supportive of you, right, in pursuing that. And just want to talk about support systems a little bit because your practice, you and your community really do provide that support system for people with lived experience and people who are impacted by lived experience, right? Because they're the families, they're the adopters, or they're people that work in the institutions that facilitate the adoptions. And so it's so critical to have these support systems and structures that people like you and I can really lean on and to draw just renewed energy from, but also to help us navigate and help us learn and understand, right, what the larger world might need from our voices. And
Mhm.
I'm so glad that that person encouraged you into that direction. And then I'm so glad that you listened, right? It is, we all know, especially for Asian Americans, mental health is a huge taboo subject. It's still an issue today of really um, having Asian Americans be comfortable around discussing their mental health needs. And that coupled, right, with someone with lived experience of uh, traumatic separation, either at birth or as an infant or as an older child, that is an area of mental health that is not yet trauma informed. And so, well, it is becoming trauma informed, but we still have a long ways to go from my perspective. So, I think that understanding that these support systems are really a key pillar, right, into us being able to move forward, whether we're doing a adoptee centered work or not, right? We can be engineers, we can be executives, whatever it is. But it's so important for us as we navigate our journeys as people with lived experience. So it would be interesting to hear a little bit about, your experience with the community around you and how that's been a support system as you continue pressing forward this work of centering lived experience.
Yeah, part of my work was pre-pandemic, and I had a faith community and leaders that I trusted and peers that I trusted, where um, I was able to kind of ask them, "Hey, I'm thinking about like launching this project and my clinic and working with adoptees, and just kind of inviting feedback. And what are some of my strengths that you would affirm? What are some considerations?" And then after COVID, um, basically just locked us all in. I virtually, I think that that was also the time when I started meeting so many incredible people online through social media platforms. And so there was like a merging of folks that I trust and who supported and cheered for me in person in my community, and then virtually getting plugged into the like Planet Adoptee, as Shannon gave me called it once. But hearing all of these different testimonies, and to say that you don't need a PhD for me to consider your testimony valid, that
Yeah.
your lived experience matters.
Yeah.
And that is something that has been profoundly important, especially as we think about research opportunities and who gets funding for research and that whole system of academia, what it means, and how important it is, though, still for adoptees um, to find entry points into academia so that we can continue discovering and um, kind of co-creating the language of what do we need as adoptees personally and professionally throughout the lifespan. So my community, like I consider to be a mixture of colleagues, fellow clinicians who are in practice, and I'm part of different clinical groups and um, education groups that you kind of stir one another on and share resources, and then also the just the elder the genealogy of adoptee eldership. I think just folks who've paved the way and they're doing their work and they're presenting their research and they're publishing their adult adoptee anthologies and they're launching their own initiatives. It's been um, incredible to see that, and especially on the hard days when I'm like, should I even be doing this? What like what what's in it for anybody? But to just see like there's a person that says, hey, I just happened to hop online. I've never really given thought about my adoption. I'm whatever, 30, 40, 50 years old. And something that I saw in a post just kind of put me in tears because that's exactly what I was thinking. But I've never heard it said like that before. I want more. Can we work
Yeah.
together? And that can be
Yeah.
something that like, that you do, Grace, or just like any adult adoptee engaged in this kind of work. It's so important that even if it's just that one person who is growing up in the middle of the cornfields of Wisconsin, they didn't have access to any of this, and now suddenly a part of them is alive that wasn't before. And that's incredible to see. So just knowing that we as a collective are making that happen for one another, not that we're like the rescuers or saviors or anything, but just how um, invaluable our work is to one another, even if we can't see the fruit of it immediately today, to just have that vision and trust that it is valuable. However, whatever I can see today, I know that there will be fruit, as we continue sowing those seeds.
Hmm. Yeah. And what you shared about the necessity, the critical necessity, right, of research, papers, um, books, content from people with lived experience, and how that is starting, right, to become a growing movement, which is good, but we're just starting. We need a lot more of that. And I appreciate so much that there are a few other friends in our circle, right, that we know that have recently published work from the lived experience perspective, because that educational and awareness piece that someone might not be open to in a one-to-one conversation or even this video conversation, but they might be open to reading it and
Mhm.
processing it on their own, in a safe space of their couch and their home and their own minds. That all of that helps us move the needle towards changing the narratives and changing, right, how we are resourcing and supporting people with lived experience as they age out of their homes, or, for a lot of foster youth age out of care. That's so important. It's why I built the Inclusion Initiative. There is a huge gap in the professional sector of any kind of resources, support, or conversation about people that identify as adoptees or as foster alums. The Inclusion Initiative did the first ever workplace study, like report and research project for career professionals that have these identities. How is there no data on that until we did it? And we continue to do that. We're scaling this study because people are, like you said, they're hungry for this information. And it informs, right? Again, how can we best support this community? We need to know what they need. We need to know what they're feeling. We need to know what they experienced. And then we can build the proper initiatives, support systems, whatever it is, but we don't know if we don't ask. And so, I'm so grateful for my friends like you in this space that are dedicating their careers to moving forward these kinds of projects and this kind of content, because what it does, right, is help unify and amplify all of our voices so that there can be change that happens in the future. So thank you so much for that. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about your faith community, because then we're going to transition into talking about some of the themes in your book. And with the faith community, right, this is pretty complicated, very layered topic
Mhm.
for adoptees and families alike, and the system as a whole, because there are so many people in the faith community that have adopted and have fostered kids. And not that that's at all wrong, right? We're not saying it's right or wrong either way. But what we're saying is, because it's happening so much in the faith community, we really need to understand how the systems of the church and organized religion, how that does impact the lived experience of people who are adopted and people who are fostered. And you you do a really great job in your book. And I want to just kind of draw out those elements in your book a little bit. So first, I would like to ask you, with your faith community, I know they've been a really great support system to you, and that's fantastic. I grew up as a pastor's kid, so I was adopted into a family where one of the parents was a pastor. And so the dominant, messages of the church and
Mhm.
saviorism, and that we needed to be saved, the gratefulness narrative, all of that was deeply, deeply pounded into me from the very beginnings of my time in that home. And, they had a lot of foster kids and adopted kids in and out, like over 20, over my time there. And so, you just kept hearing this repeated message, especially as new kids entered the home or left the home, right? And being a part of the church and standing out as a family that was that unique, hard to ignore our family, right? It was just a constant uh, uh, approach of people coming up to us being like, "Oh gosh, you're so lucky you were saved. Oh, you should be so grateful that you're in the church with us now and you're not stuck in the probably awful situation that you were in before." To making all sorts
Mhm.
of assumptions, right? And our stories are constantly told for us, even in the church. And so let's talk a little bit about um, how you have maybe seen the conversation shift in the church over your years of doing this work.
We're having more of them, and that's incredible, and we need to have more. I think there is a fear that if we introduce or acknowledge that there are any needs that can't be met through prayer, then we must not have faith in Christ. And I think that maybe comes from some protective place, and attached to some kind of um, wish to to be faithful. My fear, though, is that it closes us off from person-specific, tangible, effective, practical resources. And
Mhm.
in the research that's happening right now, mapping the life course of adoption project led by Dr. Holly McGinnis and some colleagues, they're talking about some of the barriers and some of the barriers that adoptees can face in trying to get resources or just the existence, the development of resources. One of those barriers is the love conquers all dominant narrative.
Okay.
So in my book, I talk about this, and just, we all know this, is that is fine to have love as a value, and love shows up specifically and asks, how are you dealing with all of this? And how can we show up for you in ways that are specific to you? We're not going to generalize these um, cliches to all adoptees, because every adoptee's story, the age they were relinquished, how much time they spent in different um, situations of care, transfers of custody, the communities into which they were placed, it's all different. And whether or not they know about their birth families, is it closed, is there secretive, is there openness, contact, no contact, it all demands us to ask, okay, the person in front of me, what do they need? Because just to say that adoption is love, that's not cutting it. That's not cutting it anymore. And anecdotally, I can say that for my clients that I see on a day-to-day basis, that's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
We need more than that. So looking at the lived experiences of adoptees who have grown up in the church helps us understand a little bit more about, not necessarily we're going to point our finger at the church and say, like, bad church, you're all horrible. We're going to ask, well, we recognize there's a large population of adoptees in the faith community. How can we support them while they're in that? And we want to partner with you all. We want to partner together to say, how can folks who are connected to the body of Christ receive person specific, trauma informed resources that help them develop positive racialized identities, understandings about trauma and attachment, and um, different models of healing and coalition building, and even platforms for them within the church community to speak and engage in dialogue. That's what I'm hoping to see more of, and I've seen some of that, and I've been very thankful to be invited in to different church communities to speak on this. And the ones who invite me in, they're already familiar with my work, so it's not like I'm saying anything profoundly new. They know that I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, things like, we don't see color. We have to interrogate that. Got to challenge that
Yeah.
right out of the gate, and
Right.
they're hungry for that. So they know we need to talk about this, and that's what I hope that many of us here, you all included, um, can contribute to more of. And I think the more that we can destigmatize the conversation in general, the more of those children in the pews are actually going to start to feel, wow, I'm not crazy. These are actual things that adult adoptees, or just, adoptees go through. And finally, someone's talking about it. I want to talk about it too. And if they don't want to talk about it, that's fine. We don't want to force anybody into this conversation, but we want to make it accessible and available for them. We want to put the offering out there, and then when or if they're ready, they're invited to engage in that. So that's what I've been seeing, and that's what I hope to see more of.
Yeah. That's really powerful. I think we just need to I'm sitting in the moment right now reflecting on that, because there is, so much power to the truth that you're speaking, and it doesn't have to be binary. It's not a either this or this. It's this is true and this is also true. How can we reconcile those two truths to really work together, right? To create better experiences, create better practices, create a better environment for the people that we care about. And I feel like your book really dives into that and really does a good job outlining that. Can you talk a little bit more about some uh, any practical steps or um, advice that you have that you share in your book?
For a church community, practical steps that folks can take to bring these conversations into their small groups or their families. Um, One that comes to my mind is folks that can use something like this for either a book club or sort of like a, a reading partner kind of thing of like going through this book with someone. Um, we want to ask also, like, not just inviting adoptees, and I know that this is going to be nuanced, but not just inviting adoptees into your church to speak during Adoption Awareness Month to share a positive adoption story. And there, again, there's I'm not saying that you're bad or there's a shame in there, but that's really tokenizing. That's
Yeah.
what message are we giving the body of Christ to say this is what we do? So really, it's a principle to say how can you model in the church what we wish we could see more of in the world. We don't want to replicate inside the church what we see happening in the world. What do we see happening in the world? Annie, um,
Yeah.
different
Mhm.
narratives that are just the happy-go-lucky, grateful adoptee. I'm not saying gratitude is inherently wrong or unhealthy. We're just saying don't replicate the world inside of the church. Inside of the church, we can be a place that says all adoptee voices and experiences are inherently valuable to us because they're people, they're human beings. And adoption literacy is not a threat to the church, or really our silence is to just keep them, oh, you're too young, you're just a kid, what do you know? Don't you know the statistics? Adoption saves lives. No, we want to say, you know, I can imagine that the experience of being separated from your family, your ancestry, your language, culture of origin, that can be a lot. Tell us more about how's that all working out for you, kind of thing. And we're not going to like put the flashlight on their face and interrogate every adoptee, but what are we doing in the church to make that part of our environment, though? The fabric of our ministry is to say that adoptee testimonies are relevant to us because we want to make this experience. We want to see many adoptees and families flourishing. Um, so that can look like, yeah, the book club sort of pattern. It can look like when we're inviting adoptees into positions of leadership or in the elder community. But again, that's nuanced because maybe an adoptee doesn't want to take the burden of educating the entire church about
Mhm.
adoption. So we really
Right.
have to. It's not a one size fits all sort of like formula. It's a community dialogue and figuring out, well, for our church, what feels like a step in that direction, and maybe even it looks like taking a poll of some adoptees or opening it up to them and just kind of getting a sense of what's on the radar for what folks need and want. And then from there, we can co-create and collaborate that. Inviting more adoptee um, speakers and consultants and compensating them and bringing them into the church community outside of Adoption Awareness Month
Yep.
and being open to the differing perspectives. And we're not saying that you have to change your church's mission and vision and doctrine statement. We're just saying that the more counsel that we can bring in that's guided by and informed by the lived experience of adoptees, you'll have a wider range, a wider scope to pull from when you're asking, how can we serve the adoptees under our care right now? And that's just part of the rhythm of the leadership that we're kind of submitted to say these experiences are more significant than ours. We rejoice with the truth, and we really want to show active, person-specific love. Participate in that here in this fellowship, and we can be doing that by inviting adoptees to speak, making books available to folks in the congregation, highlighting them in the newsletter, um, having maybe there's an adoptee specific small group, maybe not. That depends on how prominent they want to feel in that. But yeah, there are many different ways that we can just the spirit of adoption literacy in the church. That's really what my book is hoping to kind of ask folks, like, what would that look like in your church environment? We just know though that we're humanizing adoptees and we're giving them space to process what has happened. I've been adopted. What does that mean? It's got to mean more than adoption is love. There's more to the story, and there's
Yep.
some things that we can do about it.
Yep. And what I'm hearing from you is something that I say myself when people ask me these questions, and what I hear a lot of folks who are voices. for voicing, right, their adoptee experience and their foster experience is that create opportunities for visibility of people with lived experience and just shut up and listen. Like, just listen, because that is showing respect for our lived experience when you are actively listening.
Amen.
No refuting, no defensiveness, just listen, right? Because and if you flip it around, right, someone that is has a strong faith, right, they want to be listened to as well about their faith journey and why they believe what they believe and their faith experience. Thinking about it in that lens, well, then that is how, people with lived experience want to be treated. We want to share our experience from our own mouths, from our own perspectives. So just shut up and listen. And that's a really great way to start creating that environment that you're talking about, Kim. So
Mhm.
what are you hoping adoptive parents and foster parents take away from your book?
So in the dedication, I say something like, many children have been adopted by the church, but they haven't all been given the language to talk about and process what that means for them. I wrote this book for you. And primarily for adult adoptees reading it, that's the sort of like the emphasized reader that I'm literally writing to. And then there's an idea that there is an adoptee adjacent supporter reading, looking over the shoulder, saying, "Oh, I never thought about it that way before. How do I incorporate this into the important relationships in my life?" That's what I'm hoping folks can consider as they read, whether they're an adoptee, but you kind of asked about like caregivers and allies and supporters, that they can take from this book and we're not just trying to make a checklist about how many things do I agree with, how many things are beyond. That's not the aim of this book. This is not a checklist. It's an invitation to dialogue. And my hope is that you would take these ideas and work them out, because I can't do the work for you. You read it. I can't go into your circle of influence and tell you exactly how to apply that. I'm giving you some principles, some strategies, but really encouraging. And my exhortation is for those adoptee adjacent readers to use their creativities, their privilege, their positions of influence, their experiences and trainings, um, to really apply this for the thriving of many adoptees and foster alum in their life, micro level to macro level.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. So we're going to go into a Q&A in just a minute here, but I would love to hear from you, having authored this book. By the way, The Adoptee Journey is available on Amazon and Varsity Press. So please order your copy today and support Cam, write a review, share about the book if this resonates with you. And folks can also find you at therapyredeemed.wordpress.com. That's where your practice information lives, as well as so many of your other works, like your blog and your speaking engagements, your TV interviews. So if you want to learn more about Cam, his practice, his community, and just what he's all about, please check out therapyredeemed.wordpress.com. But going back to what I wanted to ask, seeing where you are today, understanding the impact that you've had so far and the potential that you have with, just there's just so much that is in store for you. It's really exciting to see and watch it unfold. And it's an honor to be a part of your journey in this work. But I'm sure when you were that music loving teenager who had all this internalized racism. And I can really relate to this growing up in Wisconsin in a town that didn't reflect me physically, right? And growing up with white parents, like all this internalized racism, you saw yourself as the people around you, right? You saw yourself as a white person, not an Asian person. You didn't have a lot of community until you realized, right? There's whole community of adoptees that I didn't know about until you're a older teenager, and then you started your journey towards being a mental health professional and just right helping launch this conversation and movement towards elevating and honoring the lived experience. I bet you, as that teenager, you did not think you'd ever author a book. You didn't think you'd be interviewed on national TV. You didn't think that you would be going on a TEDx stage. Like, you didn't think any of that, right? You didn't see any of that. And part of that is because people didn't allow you to see yourself or to understand you as you truly were.
Mm.
An adopted person who is Asian, but you're also so many other things, right? You're not just one thing. But had you been given space earlier in your life, right, maybe that things would have been a little different. I know for me, I think things would have been different had I been given the space, opportunity, and support to really live in my own skin and really understand what that was, and not just pretend or strive to be something that I could never be. But I spent a lot of my life chasing acceptance into a place where I didn't belong there.
Mm.
And it wasn't until recently, and now with the launching of the inclusion initiative, where I've really started to find my space and understand who I really am and how I want to show up in the world. So, all that to say, going back to your teenage self, Cam, like, what would you tell him now if you could go
That's
back?
funny. Well, one of my favorite movies back then was Back to the Future, just the idea of like time traveling
Oh,
back. But
God.
yeah, I mean, really what is powerful that just came up for me as a reaction is the fact that someone acknowledged it. And I mean, just you reflecting back to me the story that was unfolding and just what life could have been like for me. And I think simply showing up and saying, it's kind of hard, isn't it? It can be exhausting, man, but there's hope, you know? I think I'm in the business of hope. I wouldn't be a clinician if I didn't believe that we were um, just naturally designed to grow. It's just that there are some barriers involved, and if we can work together to remove some of those barriers and water some of these seeds, we're going to flourish. So sometimes I've seen it as I'm this broken, empty vessel. Just I need to like know more stuff or learn more skills. And yes, there's a place for skills training, but a metaphor that has helped me is about like an acorn naturally wants to grow out of the ground into an oak tree. It just needs sunlight and water and good soil, right? And if there's barriers, then it's not going to grow. But how relieving it is that like for one another, we don't necessarily have to like make each other grow. But when the barriers are removed and the conditions are set up just a little bit more in consideration and empathy and compassion,
Mhm.
we naturally we grow. That's just
Mhm.
we're designed for that. So
Yeah.
just looking at myself and just like, hey man, what can I do for it? How can I serve you? How can I help you? Tell me all about it. And just having a space for that is so important. And I guess if I'm traveling back in time too, I have a little device and I can just share. Hey, you don't get this right now, but here's some just representations that people who look like us can be leaders, can
Yeah.
contribute to the community, have skills. We have potentials and possibilities, and we inspire one another, and we are part of a larger reality that goes beyond this 400 person high school. Okay, man. Like just having that
Yeah.
reality, I had the wool over my eyes for so much. And in a way, I was carrying false balances around because that's all I was exposed to. People like you can only do things like this. Sorry, buddy. Well, that's a
Yeah.
false balance. So exposure to the truth, like you were saying, it's life giving, right? So I appreciate that question, and yeah, hopefully we can bestow some more of that currently as adult adoptees here for one another and to the generation that's coming up behind us.
Yeah. Nope, that's exactly right, and it's why the inclusion initiative was even dreamed up and launched because we need to see each other being things that we want to be that we never thought we could be or, like, we never knew we could be, and
Yeah.
there's so many in our community doing incredible things, and the generations coming up behind us, like, they need to see that. Visibility is so powerful, but inclusion is even more powerful. So, that's why I'm
Amen.
so excited that you're a part of, the work that we do and that we get to be in this space with you, as voices for our community. So, there's one question that I really wanna bring up, and, the question reads, "When I was younger, therapy, counseling was really weaponized against me to make me believe something was wrong with me, to shame me into behaving to be the perfect adoptee. So, how is the field how is the field of counseling and therapy in your perspective changing, Cam?"
There's a saying that a high tide raises all ships. So when I see my adoptee elders, folks like Dr. Ron Kim, Susan Bronco, Holly McGinnis doing these projects, and authors and peers, just out here, I am cheering for that. And especially in the mental health realm, I do see us making an impact. We're destigmatizing mental health support in general. That's just across the board population in our culture. For adoptees, we're working upstream because we're trying to say that this grand Hallmark card kind of experience
Yeah.
might demand from us appropriate person-centered mental health support. That's kind of profound for some people because look at everything you've gained. Why would you possibly need support for that? And yet, um, we are persisting and we are speaking and we are challenging the status quo. And the adoptee consciousness model, for example, was self-published because of this belief of open access to information and research. And I really respect that, and I'm even challenged in my own life to figure out, how do we practice that? But we're saying that the more of the adoptee experts and professionals, and yes, like I said, like your lived experience, that's the credential. And we are we are saying that we don't just want to be invited in as a token adoptee who was gave a guest presentation on campus, but promote us into positions of tenure track, right? Give us the funding to actually conduct research on ourselves. There's that idea from, I think, the disabilities rights movement in the 90s. Nothing for us without us.
Right. Yep.
Well, for adoptees, we, I mean, we can. There's maybe things that we can learn from white adoptive um, parents conducting research in field of academia, and a lot of the research has been written and published by just white males or adoptive parents. But we're saying that we don't want to just be test subjects anymore, just
Yep.
being observed. We have the capacity and the strengths and the knowledge and the creativity to develop research designs ourselves and actually connect with adoptees from adoptee to adoptee in qualitative research methods that will promote and help us develop sharper, more effective, more human interventions with one another. And I am seeing some of that. And this is coming off of last week. I was at the International Conference for Adoption Research, and people are engaging in this in real time. The data is out there, And one
Great.
of the largest calls to action is we need more. So if you by chance happen to be an adoptee in the mental health field, or you've got some interest in that sort of like, gathering data, hop aboard. And there are other adoptees cheering for you. But I am seeing the the mental health conversation gaining a better reception that it used to. And that's where a lot of the times I see my work. I'm not just out here trying to say like, oh, do this, or I've got a 5-step program for you. I really, in some ways, see myself just as an usher. I'm just trying to like point you to like, yo, here's some like really important evidence that we need to look at. And we're just asking you, what does that mean for you in your life as an adoptee, as an adoptive parent, as an ally, as a teacher, as a medical professional? Just take a look at that. Don't look at me, but just look at what we got going on over here, and what can we do to make the world a better place. And that's where I see the mental health field going right now, slowly but surely. And because of conversations like Grace and I are having right now, and the work that Grace is doing, it's becoming more of like a, how could we not do this?
Right.
In the future, folks that are not incorporating this into their ethos, into their mission statements, into their practices, going to get left behind almost. And I'm not trying to like use a scare tactic, but we're saying that this is the future
Yeah.
of research, of practice. That's what this is.
Yeah.
Thank you for that
Awesome.
question, by the way. Thank you.
Yes. Anonymous audience member. Yeah. And it is so critical, everything that our community is doing, people with lived experience on these platforms, using our voices, using our time and resources. I think the people who are not adoptees and are not foster alums that do this work forget that people that do have lived experience that choose to do this work, we're investing a lot of our own time, our own resources, our own dollars into making this stuff happen because it's just missing. And it doesn't feel like it's going to happen unless we make it happen. And so I know, especially at the beginning of your journey, that's probably a lot of what you were doing, infusing a lot of all that you had, right, to creating more visibility and opportunity for adoptees. So thank you so much for having been at it for so long. It's really encouraging, right, for new players in this space like us at the Inclusion Initiative to keep moving forward. It's been a pleasure having you as a guest. Really appreciate everything that you've done. And like I mentioned before, everyone, make sure you check out The Adoptee's Journey. It is an audiobook as well as print. You can find it at Varsity Press and on Amazon. And with that, we'll see you at the next inclusion conversation. Thank you, Cam, for joining us. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Grace. Bye, everyone.